Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. Government is testing the market's appetite for independent transmission projects. Terence Creamer joins me to talk about the prospects for private sector participation in the transmission grid. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
A request for information has been issued related to ITPs.
Yes, the National Treasury and the Ministry of Electricity and Energy have released this RFI. It's really early stage market testing exercise to see whether there's any appetite amongst funders, developers in this space for independent transmission projects which would be privately developed. We haven't really settled on a model yet as South Africa as to how this would go about, but the testing exercise is part of a context where government is keen to see private sector participation in a number of sectors. Electricity, we know in the renewable space, we already have a major IPP force that has been rolled out over the last 15 years. And then we're seeing more in other infrastructure sectors as well, such as rail, where we are about to see possible tenders going out as well in the coming year, as well as for third-party access, as well as in the port system. A little bit of stop-start in all these sectors, because there's teething problems. It's new for South Africa. We really had monopoly state-owned enterprises dominating, but we are testing the waters here as well in the grid space.
Why is government keen to pursue private sector participation in the transmission grid?
I think the main thing is, we've got a big backlog in terms of investment in our grid, and that's really come to the fore over the last few years as particularly wind developers have made application to connect to the grid in certain provinces, the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape. And basically Eskom and now the National Transmission Company South Africa said basically the grid is constrained and we need to build new infrastructure to accommodate that. And so it's really constraining the connection of new generation capacity. It's estimated at about 390 billion, so it's a big backlog. And there is a transmission development plan by the NTCSA, and it's also a very large plan looking at 14,000 kilometers of new power lines, a lot more transformers, substations in the system. And really it's the pace at which the NTCSA and Eskom previously has been building out that capacity has been very slow. So we're looking to accelerate, and government, I think, is really wanting the private sector to help with that acceleration.
What is the National Transmission Company South Africa's stance?
They're somewhat cool at the moment. They aren't embracing the PSP model wholeheartedly. They're concerned about their balance sheet. They've just been unbundled from the Eskom, still an independent subsidiary of Eskom Holdings, and will ultimately exit Eskom, be its own company in terms of the legislation that is still pending activation. So we haven't got it in force yet, but ultimately they need to emerge as a transmission system operator. And they're concerned financially what the implications could be for them. They also used to being the monopoly, the only game in town. So I think that's a culture issue as well for Eskom, but it's a culture. The National Treasury is also concerned about the implications because they've got a lot of contingent liabilities on the national accounts related to the renewables program. None of these have ever realized. It's a low risk, but it's a risk. So they've been working with the World Bank on a credit guarantee model that will take that risk off the national accounts. And it seems the NTCSA wants a similar model, but it's going to be difficult to have no liability reflecting on the NTCSA balance sheet. If you have a build, operate, own and transfer type model, or build, operate and transfer model, there's going to be has to be reflected somewhere. At the moment, all NTCSA has accepted is what they call build and transfer, which is not really common internationally, but it really looks like what people would call an EPC plus finance. They see that as something that sort of a risk they could bear. But there's been work, and there's continual work on the model, and that's happening in parallel with this market testing exercise, I suppose.
What are the prospects for ITPs in South Africa?
Well, I think ultimately they will go ahead. We're looking at a pilot project starting at the end of next year sometime, and this RFI is really preparing for that. The National Treasury government generally, I think, is once bitten, twice shy in terms of having a monopoly over electricity. You know, we saw the load shedding era and what that meant, and that has, despite Eskom's much better performance in the last, since the 26th of March, but in the last year, and the sort of disappearing at the moment of load shedding, you know, that having all the eggs in one basket really, that risk really did materialize for South Africa. So I think, again, the transmission is a weak link at the moment. It's not the weakest link. Ironically, the weakest link is downstream of that at the distribution sector, but it is a weak link in the chain. We're getting more investment in the generation side, but we need this constraint to be eased. And the pace at which the NTP is being invested in by NTCSA is just not sufficient. So National Treasury, government in general wants that accelerated. And I think ultimately, because Eskom's trading under sort of support by the taxpayer, which is the conduit is the National Treasury, sort of there's a lot of power. The balance of power is with government and the National Treasury rather than the NTCSA board ultimately, because they hold the purse strings. And I think they're saying, look, you guys are not moving fast enough. We need a private sector participation to help accelerate this. We need to find a model. So I think ultimately they will settle on a model and there will be a pilot project. The issue is, will it be a sustainable one? We saw what happened, you know, when Eskom exercised its monopoly power back in about 2014, 2015 and refused to sign new renewables PPAs. Could we see a stop-start approach in this ITP space? That's a threat. We're already seeing the distribution division, which hasn't yet even been unbundled or legally separated, asserting its monopoly power around the issue of traders. And now we hear that they're also wanting to do it around people that have solar panels on their roof, and they fall under the Eskom system, distribution system. There seems to be a flexing of the muscles there, so that's the ugly side of the monopoly business is bearing its teeth. So it's, you know, will we get into a steady state of using the private sector capital, money, expertise, not only in the generation space, but also in the transmission where there's a big backlog, and ultimately, I think also in distribution, or will the monopoly dog bear its teeth all the way and we'll see a stop-start, which has been very destructive in the renewable space.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News Daily Email newsletter.